It's Suicide Prevention Week, and this year, with the non-stop pressures and uncertainties of today's world, the impact of suicide is more widely felt than ever. By recognizing this as a public health issue, it's important that we face it with empathy, with honesty, and with absolutely zero judgment. Hello, I'm Prakriti Poddar, the Global Head for Mental Health and Wellbeing for Round Glass. Before we begin, here's the hard truth about the global impact of suicide.
Every year, more than 700,000 people die by suicide. 20 million try. That's one person lost to suicide every 40 seconds. The time it takes to make your bed,
We are here.
floss your teeth, tell somebody you love them. Join Round Glass and millions of people around the world to create hope through action on International Suicide Prevention Day, September 10th. Help us prevent suicide and save lives.
This is why we're all here. And it's a really important moment in time, especially with all the havoc that's been created around us through the environment and through our own personal challenges. If any questions come up from you, please feel free to put them in our chat. Round Glass is devoting 5 days of suicide prevention programming this week as we approach International Suicide Prevention Day on Friday, September the 10th. To navigate this discussion, I've invited Dr. Elisha Goldstein from the Center for Mindful Living to help really unpack some of the central themes around suicide, around the feelings of blame, forgiveness, courage, connection, and loneliness. Welcome, Dr. Elisha. It's lovely to see you again.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
And as you know, I know in our business, it's really important for us to know what's happening. And the World Health Organization has placed a global target for reducing suicide rates in countries by 2030 by about 1/3. And I'm hoping that all of us together can really work hard at achieving this. The at-risk population is growing, and suicide is getting a reputation of being a global pandemic, an emotional pandemic. Why do you think this is?
Well, aside from just even before COVID hit our, the world in general, there's been an increasing sense of disconnection, an increasing sense of comparing ourselves to other people and not being able to live up to what we believe, how we believe we should be. So an increasing sense of shame. There's an increasing sense of loneliness right now because we're training in some way the ability to not connect deeply with one another, and a connection as the epicenter of well-being and disconnection as the epicenter of dis-ease. And that's why I think we're seeing an increasing, when we talk about suicide, we're seeing the rate of suicide or even suicidality increasing most sharply amongst the younger population than the older population. And it's important to be aware of what the signs are. It's important to talk about it. It's important to release our shying away from the discussion around it, because that keeps it hidden in the dark. And when we do that, that's when we can't see clearly the people who are suffering around us.
It's so true. I blame loneliness. I've often found that, given the current situation and the way in which our population is developing, and especially the youth, 47% are actually extremely fragile and has been known to be a large population just in the youth numbers for suicidal ideation. And having worked in the space for a while, I recognize that what you're saying about being disconnected is truly a problem. And how do we, I know one of the things that you've mentioned right now is communication and really talking about this. How do we help build how do we help build support structures that enable the us to connect with the youth and also connect with these ideas of prevention?
Well, first of all, most youth, as it turns out, or a lot of them, get their support within the school system. And so the mental health services within the school systems in particular are very important to support and grow and bolster, because that's where a lot of mental health is happening for youth right now. And to destigmatize, I think that our culture's been moving in some ways. We've been trying to balance this out, because we've been trying to move towards destigmatizing mental health issues like depression and anxiety and trauma, and to open up the conversation. Different people who are influencers out there who open up around it, like celebrities and the media, and the places that people look to say, like, oh, how should I be in this world, need to allow for a discussion around it. Parents need to be educated more around that it's more important to start the conversation around it if they're seeing any kind of warning signs than shying away from it because they feel like maybe they might be exacerbating an issue. And so the discussion around it's better to talk about it than to not talk about it if you're seeing anything, to because that could prevent something, or there's a higher likeliness that you may, if we have the conversation, and to release the shame around it. And so I think there's that education that needs to happen. It's so scary to see people we love suffering in a way, and it's easier to, because it's so uncomfortable, it's easier to try and minimize it in our minds, say like, well, maybe it's not really that big of an issue. And to be able to realize that, you know what, if there's any probability that I'm seeing right now, to be able to open up the conversation and say, I'm noticing these things that are happening right now. Are you thinking of hurting yourself? Or are
Yeah.
you having thoughts around killing yourself? Are these things happening? To be able to open up the conversation and to give parents and the people in the public the permission and the validation of how important it is to have that conversation could save a lot of lives.
Yeah, and I see that there is often a gap between understanding when the situation catastrophizes in the mind of the person going through a mental health situation, and how do we identify and understand that it's catastrophized so much that it's leading to suicidal ideation?
If you're first of all, catastrophizing is part of being human, and has only been increasing in this last year and a half or so. We've seen anxiety triple over the last year, and the last 2 years, and in the last year become really steady. We've seen increasing signs of depression and anxiety in our population, but we're looking for things like someone saying things like, "Oh, hey, I'd be better off dead. I think I'd be better off dead," or "I'm going to. I feel like I want to kill myself." These little things are just kind of are maybe things that we might kind of say, well, they're not really thinking that. Or we're looking at people we love who are all of a sudden showing more mood swings or crying excessively. We're looking at rage outbursts. We're looking for increased reckless behavior, whether that's substance abuse or could be anything that is related to some other kind of disorder. Just looking for this to just have our eyes open, to see, like, are these signs that are here? Do I need to open up the conversation around this? And I think that's really to me, that's the place to start. It's really our own discomfort with death in general, our own discomfort with the fear of something like that happening. So that our nervous system shuts down. We're wired to move away from discomfort, not towards it. And so
Yes.
to be able to, if someone's let's say they're catastrophizing, that's one thing. But if it's catastrophizing around and then leading to a thing like saying something like, "I'd be better off dead," then that's something different. And maybe they're just catastrophizing in a normal type of way and they don't really mean it, but we need to check it out. I know at me as a mental health professional, if I hear anything like that, the person I'm working with needs to tell me like, hey, I don't really mean this. I'm really going to check it out because
Yeah.
I have a responsibility in that way. But as if you're not a trained professional, you might be more susceptible to avoid the discomfort around it. And it's not your fault if you are. That's your nervous system playing an old track of just moving away from what's uncomfortable. And so
Yeah.
we minimize it, or we dismiss it, or we try and not see it, or we try and placate it in some way, and we don't actually open the discussion around it. Which, by the way, just to say, and I'll close with this, is that when we open up the conversation, when we move towards the discomfort and allow ourselves to see the suffering of the person that's there and move towards a conversation as best we can, right? It may not be us that can help this person so much. It may need they need to open up to other professionals or other people. We can make a whole list of different people who might be a support. But when we begin to do that, what are we doing? We're moving towards connection. Something that's not there for that person. There's a major disconnection happening, and so we're moving towards connection, and we're doing the best we can. And so this is all about education to ultimately just do the best we can with this.
Yeah. I mean, I love that we're talking about communicating and talking about what people go through so that we can destigmatize what really goes on. And I want to add a few voices and a few stories and a few personal experiences. And to start with, I'd like to bring on Jenny Tiao, a mother from Singapore whose 20-year-old son died by suicide 3 years ago after a devastating breakup. Jenny says that her son had a history of anxiety and depression. She's not present today, but we're going to play her story for you.
Josh's death for me, it was particularly difficult because he was my only child. I felt like that was it. There goes my future in terms of generations to come. I was the one who found his lifeless body. And I suffered from post-traumatic stress syndrome with constant flashbacks and constant bouts of uncontrollable sobbing for months. I've learned that George's action didn't happen overnight. It was the build-up of what is called adverse childhood experiences or negative life experiences. I was able to put myself in my son's shoes to understand the unbearable psychological pain he was going through that caused him to take his life. I know for sure I don't think he wanted to leave. He just didn't know how to live anymore. Sharing Josh's story each time has helped me feel that I can be a mom again. I want to leave a legacy behind for my son to make an impact, to make a difference to someone else. I know we can't help everyone, but everyone can help someone. One life lost is one too many. One life saved is all worth it.
Elijah, in this case, how do we help? How do we help others going through situations like this?
So first, let me just say is that when it comes to suicide, it's complicated, and it's not. There's no like this is what you do, and then everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
I really want to reiterate that everyone can only do the best they can. Most people who have suicidal thoughts don't want, as the woman here said in that in the video here, they don't want to leave. They just don't know how to live. They don't really want to do that. There's a deep sense of hopelessness that begins to loop on itself. And the first thing we need to do is educate ourselves to the signs that are there. All the things that I said before, which is the sense of withdrawal or the excessive moodiness or statements that are there that are inclining at all towards hurting themselves in any way. The second thing we want to do is we don't want to withdraw. And we want to recognize our own pain around it, but moving towards communication around it is moving towards connection. And we want to move the needle from disconnection to connection. So it never hurts to ask, really. We might get if it's a parent to a child, we might get a lashback in some way and say like, "Oh, stop asking me that. Why are you asking me that kind of thing?" Or why would you say something like that? But if that's what comes out of that, to be able to ask the question of, are you really thinking this? Do you want to explore this? Like, these things that you're saying, then that's 100% worth it. And so we want to educate ourselves. We want to move towards connection. We want to move towards communication with it. What we don't want to do is we don't want to blame the person. We don't want to minimize their experience. We don't want to say something like, "Oh, you wouldn't do something like that." We don't want to do that, because that's us feeling uncomfortable with it and moving away. Remember, we want to move towards connection, not towards disconnection, and it's really hard. And so let's kind of do that. We want to create and last thing I'll say is, we want to, if we realize something's that we want to support. And I know some people in my life that have done a really great job with this, that they want to create a support system around this person. And that includes ourselves, but we might not be the primary person. It might be a minister or a doctor, or it might be a mentor of some kind, but we want to start to create that social support circle, because again, we're facilitating connection in that way.
Yeah. And I know that you spoke a bit before about teens and the repercussions that take place when the communication or the disconnection gets amplified. I'm wondering, I know that you've said that the education system has to provide these means. And one of the other things that you're talking about at this point is go ahead, get out of your comfort zone and really ask somebody how they're feeling, despite, really not knowing whether it would be received with, with the kind of with the kind of passion that you're asking. But connection and communication is really important. I really find that, I have teens myself. I'm a mother of 3 children, and I'm trying to understand ways in which we can help them sort of move away or create that distance between perception and reality, so that they're able to deal with their situation or their thoughts in a more holistic manner. I know you've been doing so much work in this space, and would really like to get some tips around how we can help create that distance between their perceived and their experience of trauma that they're going through.
One of the greatest things I've seen around supporting implicit bias around things, or our perception of things, is to find a role model that is, and it doesn't have to be somebody knows, who's kind of been there and moved through things, so they can see that this indeed does change. Everything shifts and changes. And so there's the communication piece. I'm a huge fan of groups, like teen groups. If we're talking about teens in particular, like teen groups. So the teens that are facilitated, so teens can talk about stuff within an open manner. See, the other teens are also feeling and experiencing this. And so again, it facilitates a sense of connection that's there. Yeah. There's more and more in the field of telehealth right now that's popping up online if people don't have it locally available for them. And again, I'm a big fan of really supporting mental health in schools. And if you have a school that you're connected with, or you're in your local community, and there's any way for you to support mental health services in schools, this is going to be the first point of triage for a lot of kids and a lot of teens. And so, again, anything that can support connection and open communication around it in a destigmatized way is what's going to move from a contraction to an openness, which allows for us to release the shame around it and get help.
Thank you. And I think Jenny, who you've just seen, has taken her pain and used it to mobilize transforming the lives of others through her organization, Stigma to Strength, in Singapore.
Right.
Her purpose is to prevent others from falling prey to mental health issues. These are some of the unsung heroes that are truly making a difference, one person at a time. Talking about making a difference, we have Mark Hennick, a mental health advocate who's made it his life's purpose to prevent suicide. Mark will also share his personal experience. At 15, Mark was struggling and tried to jump off a bridge. But he says that a 10-minute conversation with an absolute stranger saved his life. His viral TED Talk, Why We Choose Suicide, has been viewed by 6.7 million people, and that number continues to grow. And to continue this information dissemination to save lives, he's written a new book called The So-Called Normal. It's a memoir. Welcome, Mark, to our panel.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Your journey with mental health illness really started preteen. I think at 10, you claimed that you were plagued with feelings of depression and anxiety, and then at 12, had suicidal thoughts. Were there some causes, issues, and triggers that amplified this?
That's right. You know, I was first discovered to be suicidal at only 12 years old. And it was a teacher, like your last guest mentioned. Teachers, guidance counselors, folks in schools, they're on the front lines of recognizing when kids might be struggling. And that was certainly the case for me. So a teacher first recognized that I was suicidal because they had discovered that I was drawing in the margins of a social studies test. But really, when I look back at the few years before that, my grades had been tanking for years anyway, from late elementary school through part of middle school. And that should have been the first cue that I was struggling, because I had always identified as a smart kid before. I really valued my schoolwork and I enjoyed it. But then suddenly I was caring less about the things that I cared about before. I wasn't trying as hard. I wasn't asserting myself as much. I felt dumb. I felt like I just didn't know how to do any of the things that I previously did. So for me, I think it really started the downhill trajectory anyway, when my family situation started to break up when I was very young. I moved into a new home, my siblings and mother and I, where I was surrounded by this culture of toxic masculinity on behalf of my stepfather. And while it wasn't necessarily explicitly discouraged from speaking openly about mental health, that was definitely the message that we got in a secondary way. You know, being told to suck it up, that boys don't cry, to be tough, to be a man, even though I was just a little boy. So absorbing all those messages and what started out in my stepfather's voice, I realized much later in writing my memoir that his voice started to turn into my voice in my head, because it was in that critical period when I was just developing my own ability to cope or not be able to cope, as it were, with these kinds of emotions. So I think that was really the earliest point, when I had no stability in my home. I'd never learned the skills of how to deal with these powerful emotions inside me. So then as I became an adolescent, that's when, you know, the wheels really fell off, and I found myself cycling in and out of the psychiatric ward in our local small town hospital so many times that I just became known as what's kind of known disparagingly in the healthcare system as a frequent flyer. Somebody who, the more help they need, the less help they get. And really, for me, it was my ever-escalating ways to just try to get help, to try to connect with somebody who understood what I was going through.
And that sense of isolation that you must have felt as a child, really, how do you now help people and children and the youth work through that?
Well, that was the most crushing feeling for me, to feel like my whole world was sucking in on itself, that it was collapsing in on itself. And that came from a number of different domains. You know, inside my own mind, I felt like I didn't even have any control over my own thoughts, I thought at the time. I thought that I was going to be trapped in this brain, in this life, for the rest of my life. Socially, I felt trapped in a school where I had started to attract bullies, as many vulnerable kids do, I think. I felt trapped in the small town that I lived in, where there weren't many mental health resources. There certainly weren't any meaningful conversations about mental health. So I felt that my world literally was closing in on me, as well as my mind too. But really what helped, I think, that expansion start was when I was interrupted during what ended up being my final suicide attempt by a complete stranger that you mentioned in the intro. He wasn't a doctor or a psychologist or a psychiatrist or anything like that. He had no professional skills in, pulling kids off bridges, which is where I had found myself by that last attempt. But that didn't matter because that wasn't what I was looking for. I wasn't looking for yet another person, I felt, to treat me like a broken down car on the side of the road, to categorize me and to medicate me more, to bring me back to the hospital, the place where everybody knew my name, I felt like. But rather, I needed somebody who really tried to see the world from my perspective. And that's what that man did with me for the brief period of time that we spent together. And that turned out to be a pivotal moment for me, because from that point forward, after he actually eventually culminated to him reaching out and grabbing me and pulling me off that bridge, that's a story I tell in that TED Talk, he for me served as a role model, even though I really didn't even know who he was until many years later, that I wanted to be like that stranger in the light brown jacket, as I knew him at the time, who had my back, really quite literally reached out and saved my life. And I think that's how sometimes we have to break through the isolation, that collapse that people are feeling. Sometimes we have to be brave enough ourselves as helpers to reach into their darkness, to interrupt that spiral downward, and to show them, to inspire them to see that it can be a different way.
And you call it a perception collapse, or something similar to that. What is this perception collapsing, and what does it display itself like in the mind of somebody who's struggling?
So there's a couple of things happening here. This idea that I started talking about in my TED Talk a few years ago, but really have been articulating it throughout my career since, which is this idea, psychologically, of cognitive rigidity, that your thinking becomes tight and very narrow, very black and white, and particularly when you're hyper aroused, when you're very activated, and there's a perceived threat. Neurologically, we see that our attention centers of our brain focus in on that. Evolutionarily speaking, we zero in on that perceived threat because we're trying to keep ourselves safe. We don't think about anything else. It doesn't matter if you're telling somebody, but you have so many other options, right? But they can't see them. And if you can't see your other options, then you don't have any other options because they're not available to your mind. You've blocked them out. This is also why I think that people who love people who are suicidal, particularly parents and spouses, they often don't see the signs either. Because psychologically, even neurologically, we block it out as an option that something so painful might someday happen to us. So we just can't see it. And that's what I think that collapse is like inside the mind of somebody who's suicidal, that they're perceiving this threat, even if it's coming partially from within them, but also there are external factors as well. And they think, I thought, that my only option to escape that pain was to end my life. And I didn't have any other way of getting out of that until somebody else helped me breathe some expansiveness into that perception of the world around me. And that took a very long time. Don't get me wrong. Recovery isn't something that happens overnight. It takes practice. It takes a lot of falling down and getting back up again until eventually you look back, you glance back and realize how far you've come.
Yeah, that's truly incredible that you've managed to break it down and are helping other people also identify this. The perceived threat at 15, I know you talk about the pain. What was that got you there to that point? What was it that created the situation around you that brought you there? I know the voice of the family members and the voice of maybe the bullies around you, but I'd really like for the audience to understand truly how to see people who are going through a struggle.
I'm of the school of thought that suicide doesn't come out of nowhere. And, we hear that all the time. I didn't see this coming. That's almost expected, actually, from people who love people or even just vaguely know people who die by suicide. But what we know is that there are often a number of risk factors, that often people who are suicidal do have very subtle ways of showing that. But often we miss those signs because either we're too close to the person and we're unable to, or we don't have enough of that baseline knowledge to be able to really compare how they're presenting right now with how they've usually presented. And I grew up on the East Coast in Canada, Nova Scotia. I guess the most similar in the United States would be Maine. So we do a lot of lobster fishing on the East Coast. And I use the analogy all the time of how it's best practice and the most humane practice when you're cooking a lobster to put it into hot water first, to heat up the water and then put it into the hot water first. So that way the shock doesn't allow the lobster to suffer. If you put it into cold water and slowly heat it up, it will suffer longer as it acclimates or habituates to the increasing temperature. This is what I think so many suicidal people experience, is this gradual incremental burn that by the time they get to what ends up being, they think, the end of the road, they'd already been accumulating traumas and stresses and difficulties and entrenching their depression and anxiety, often for a very long time, in such imperceptible ways. That's why I think it's so critically important that we have to go way further upstream than we currently are to prevent suicide. Yes, it's key. It's key to have crisis services for when people are when they've already fallen through the cracks. We need to have that piece of the system. But we also need to treat the things that lead to depression. We need to treat, or that lead to suicide, rather. We need to treat depression, for example. Even moving back further, working back further, we need to train kids, especially, how to name and label their emotions. How do you deal with something if you don't know what it is? It's just a vague feeling in the background ether of your psychological experience. So if we can actually move way back further, even into helping parents give their kids the skills that they need before those kids are even born, this is the generational shift that will help us to get out of this rut that we've fallen into this collective societal perceptual collapse.
Yeah, thank you for that. I know, Dr. Elijah, you've been doing a lot of work on this, so I'd love to get your inputs around this conversation.
Well, I love listening to this and your story too, and I'm glad almost 7 million people have seen that TED Talk, and hoping your book goes on to support many, many people in their lives. So thank you for writing that memoir, and it just shows through, when we talked before and you asked the question about, like, well, how do we change perception? And it's through stories like this that someone sees that, oh wow, someone was feeling just like me. And I'm seeing this, and I'm seeing that there was something on the other side, and I think that's incredibly powerful. I'm also a big supporter of helping people just become more aware of and less afraid of their emotions, and I think the movement we've had as a culture to try and destigmatize mental illness, or just emotional suffering, let's call it whatever you want to call it. To be able to name the sadness, the grief, the confusion, the uncertainty, the struggle that happens, that's there, and to be able to have conversations about it. I really do think it's around the teachers and the parents, and for a lot of people, like, I mean, I run family retreats, and I've seen parents and teens for a very long time, and often in the beginning, I'll never forget it, the parents comes in and basically are like, hey, fix my child. There's something going on with my child. And I'm like, what about you? Like, what about you? So there is a reality to the system around it. And I feel really heartened and hopeful in some ways. I am seeing a lot more education happening with parents and teachers in our school system, around emotional intelligence and around being able to name emotions, around talking about and destigmatizing mental health issues. And it's the other generation, the older generation, like me or older or whoever, who are the parents that also need to be able to say, I need to be okay. I need to be okay facing my own discomfort, to talk to my kids about this if I'm seeing this, or to talk to my friends about this if I'm seeing this. I do believe exactly what you're saying, Mark, that we don't see it. If I told you to close your eye, if I told you I give you 5 seconds to look around and see if you can notice everything around you that's brown, and then I told you to close your eyes and tell me everything around you that's green, you'd have a hard time telling me what was green around you, because we are only paying attention to certain things that we're selectively attending to. And if we have certain programming inside us that says, stay away from what's uncomfortable, or this couldn't happen to me, it happens to other people. If we were in a room of 1,000 people right now and said, who here has been affected by suicide in one way or another, you would get almost everyone raising their hands. And so whether it was an uncle or a child or a parent or a sibling or somebody or a friend or whatever. And so this is something that affects pretty much everybody to some degree or another. So to be able to recognize that and be okay and have the training to be okay with our own discomfort allows us to have the courage to be vulnerable enough to ask these questions. Let's have a conversation about this. To be that man that grabbed you off the bridge, that took courage. Maybe it was a reaction on his part, but he could have just been like scared by it and like moved away. Hey, this is something too scary for me. But he had the courage to reach out and grab you and save your life in that way. And then that changed everything. And of course, was a road after that. But it starts with us. 100% about being able to have a conversation, destigmatize, be able to communicate, move towards connection within ourselves, around our own discomfort, and towards other people that we love and care about, who we see that are suffering, and to be aware of those signs. So I'm really hopeful about this, and so thank you for all your work, everyone here.
Thank you, Elijah. Another question for you is, how do we actually utilize or grow our skills of being comfortable in asking the right questions, asking the meaningful questions, and supporting others? How do we grow our resilience in that way? Because you did mention that we shy away from things that are uncomfortable, and I know that it takes all of us, everybody who's listening, to grow that skill to be able to help another person. How do we start on that journey?
Our body's a barometer for how we're feeling. And if you think about people that you love and you think about them suffering, you can generate a feeling within you. Typically, it's grief or fear. And, that's maybe even underlying the anxiety, the grief or fear. And that feeling inside you could be in your chest, could be in your throat, could be some kind of subtle feeling, is a sign to you that you're about to probably move away from something important. And so can I be aware of this? And then the question is, for me, I need to feed myself, learn how to feed myself self-compassion, the recognition that I'm suffering with the inclination to want to support myself. I'm not even talking about the person this is a very important skill for someone who's emotionally suffering. I'm talking about the auxiliary person who's going to be the person to reach out and say, are you really thinking about this? Move towards communication. Let's talk about this. I'm really sorry you're feeling this way. The move towards empathy. The move towards empathy takes a lot of courage in this situation, but we have to have our own emotional intelligence and be able to hold our own discomfort. So the recognition of, wow, this is really hard for me. I'm struggling with this right now. What do I actually need right now to be able to soothe this? Because this is painful. I feel grief. I feel suffering in relationship to the person who's feeling grief and suffering. And so then we do that. And what we notice underneath it, well, the reason we're feeling that way is because we also feel a lot of love. And there's a tremendous amount of love, and love and pain come from the same place. And so then we can move towards and ask the question. And again, it never hurts to ask. It never hurts to ask, are you thinking of hurting yourself? Are you having thoughts of killing yourself? Are those coming up for you right now? And to be able to move towards that is a move towards connection and communication. And so if there's any message that for myself or for people I love or for anyone who's listening here, that I want to really drive home here is education and the move towards our own self-compassion around this, and the move towards compassion and empathy and action. And when I was thinking about this the other day, I was thinking, the opposite of despair, which usually drives suicidal ideation, isn't hope. It seems like the opposite of despair would be hope, but the opposite of despair isn't just hope, it's action. And so it's within our actions that we need to be able to move toward and ask those questions and move towards having the dialogue and the discussion around it. That's how it's the action that grabbed Mart off the bridge and saved him in that moment. And that's what we want to continue to educate and move towards, and have the courage to do so.
Thank you for that. I think, talking about action, if we could all sort of pledge for today that we would use a means when we congregate over a meal, or our family members are together, or our friends are together, that we start talking about mental health and we start reducing the stigma by actually having conversations that are heavy. Conversations become lighter as you keep exposing yourself to them. So I would really hope that everybody here who's here for suicide prevention understands that even just having a conversation over a meal with your own family members and your own loved ones really helps all of us. And it would really work extremely well to break down the stigma. And Mark, I know that you've worked on breaking down the stigma for many people, not only through the conversations that you've been having, but really reaching out over platforms and in person. And you've spoken a while about contact-based education. In a nutshell, what is that?
So contact-based education is when you have people, to simplify it, who have been there sharing their experience, coming back out of the cave to tell the others of what they found. I think that's so key in breaking down stigma, because you can give people all of the data that you want, but data changes, of course. That's the nature of good science, is that it's supposed to change and evolve over time. But people's stories throughout history have had a common thread. This commonality of not wanting to feel the pain and the suffering that often comes with depression, with anxiety, with suicidality, and then the great lengths we go to try to avoid that pain, or try to hide that pain from others. And I think if we can help people do anything through our sharing of stories, it's to show them that pain is okay, that it's okay to suffer, that it's okay to not be okay. And when we do that, when we model that through our storytelling, we can say openly about the most vulnerable times in our lives. That gives other people permission to do it too. And then hopefully someday they realize that they never needed permission to begin with. But if that's what can open the door, as one person sharing their story, and I've seen this countless times speaking all over the world about my own story, that people want to talk about their experiences too. The problem is that nobody's asking, or at least not enough people are asking. So that's what contact-based education does. It opens the door for others to share the stories that they already have. And as Anne Lamott wrote, you own everything that has ever happened to you. So you might as well do something with it.
Yeah, thank you. And I know that some people don't talk about anything that they're going through. And what happens then is that people are left unaware of what's going on. And the stigma then doesn't only lie with the person who's going through a mental health crisis, but also moves through to the family and dives. The entire family gets into a cauldron of shame, anger, grief, despair, the very same feelings that the person in a crisis was going through, which really brings me to our next guest, Laurie Pritchard. Laurie's been dealing with the aftermath of her husband's death for the past 2 years. And I'll let Laurie tell us her story.
On August 16th, 2019, my beloved husband of nearly 15 years, Travis, took his own life. That morning had been like any other, but it was my birthday, and he'd left me gifts and a card before I left for work. We got our kids up and ready for school and kissed them goodbye. We never saw him again. I found journals he'd been writing in for the last 2 years, describing the darkness and pain he'd been feeling, pain he never spoke of. He was a master at hiding it. He was ashamed. Above all else, Travis loved his children. They were his everything. To leave them knowing he'd never see them again is proof to me that depression can distort your reality.
Welcome, Laurie, to the panel. And thank you for sharing your story. What does Suicide Prevention Week mean to you?
I think in my husband's case, after his death, I started going through everything of his and all of his search histories on his iPad and on his computer. And I found that he had been researching depression and suicide for a very long time. And so Suicide Prevention Week to me means if I can talk about this openly, without shame, without embarrassment, I could reach another Travis out there who is hiding it, who is embarrassed and ashamed. And if he can just, or she, turn to someone that they love and say, I'm feeling this way, then we can prevent someone from taking their life.
Yeah, I know that you did speak about reading his journals, and there were a few things that came up for you. And I'd really like to understand what would be some of the things that you weren't aware of, that became a highlight and that you were shocked to learn from reading his journals.
He talked a lot about being in pain. And the more I begin to understand depression, the more I realize that people suffering with that actually feel physical pain. And he talked about that, never spoke of it, not once, but wrote about the physical pain that he was feeling. And he was using lists of gratitude of his children, of his family, me, trying to remind himself of the good things in life. But it was the deep, deep pain that he talks journals.
Thank you. Elijah, there are some cases where there's perfectly hidden depression. I mean, you can't see it. You can't feel it. You don't know what's happening. And I know that Mark said that there's always signs and it's a culmination. But what happens, when we can't see it, and how common is that, where, we're blindsided by what's brewing under the surface?
I think you'll talk to a lot of people who are experiencing depression that have a really good game face, and you might not notice it. Their friends might not know it. Their family may not know it, and that could be the case. And just like Mark said earlier, that you may just not see the nuance of it either, because you're not really looking for it, because it's just and you don't want to see it, and it's an implicit thing, meaning like it's happening in a more subconscious place, the idea of like not wanting to be aware of the discomfort that's there. So I think there is a reality to that, being common to some extent. However, we're getting better and better, I think, at recognizing signs and talking about this and destigmatizing it, and more than ever. And I think maybe that's one of the benefits of technology, being able to reach more people with these types of messages and destigmatizing in a larger way. There's an app out there called, I have no stake in it, so I can speak about it, but Clubhouse, that's out there, that I remember when it first came out. There's all kinds of groups coming up around mental illness, and groups of people just talking about their experience and saying how healing it was. And it's just audio, and how healing it was just to get on and hear other people's stories and being able to share theirs. And so I think that we're getting better at it. There is sometimes the cases, and I will say this, that and if somebody is really dead set on taking themselves out, that may just be what happens, and their family and friends, there maybe was really nothing they could do, and that can be to deny that reality or that possibility, I think is it doesn't really make sense, because of course that's possible. And
Yes.
it's because there's so much shame around mental illness, there's more reason to hide it and to get good at hiding it. And the longer someone has it, maybe since childhood, the better they might be at hiding it too. And so it's this thing that you're talking about, Laura, that you're coming out here and saying, if someone can hear this message, this is what we're talking about. You can open a door with your story and your message, and with Mark's story and his message. And this is what's so powerful about these types of events that are happening. And may it be so. May one person be affected by this right now.
Yeah. And I feel that, a really important area to address here is the somatics, the point that, Laura, you made about your husband feeling physical pain. And I know, Mark, if you could speak to that, what is, how the somatic pain, how are we addressing it when we're actually raising awareness for mental health and suicide prevention?
You know, sadness and depression aren't the same thing. Stress and anxiety aren't the same thing. And many advocates, I'd say most mental health advocates, push that point really hard. I'm actually of the perspective that we can build more empathy for the experiences that people with mental illnesses have when we actually tap into stuff that we already know. And this comes from a bit of an adult education background as well. So while no, sadness and depression aren't the same thing, they do share a lot of commonalities. So if you can tap into that feeling of extreme sadness in yourself, even grief, anybody who's ever grieved, certainly folks here, knows how physically gutting grief feels. Now look at somebody who might be experiencing depression, and we know that depression and grief actually seem to have a lot in common. Imagine being stuck in that feeling of grief, of not being able to process, and then living with that for 2 years, for 5 years, for 10 years, your whole life. Then it, I think, becomes much more understandable why that person's resilience falters, why they believe that it will always be that way and that they have no other options, because physically it feels very painful. So I think that it does help us to reflect on what we do know, and then to try to extrapolate that into at least a bit of an empathy building toward what that other person might be experiencing.
Thank you. And Dr. Elijah, we've got Angela who's asking you a question about why do men complete suicide more often than women do?
Let me just say one thing to the last question first, which is that, there's been studies that have shown that when people are feeling emotional pain, if they take a physical pain reliever, it relieves their emotional pain to some degree, showing that emotional pain and physical pain lie in the same areas of the brain, and similar areas of the brain. And so that's why emotional pain is so painful physically, because it's in our body. Where it's a nervous system. Our body's literally contracting around our heart or other areas, and so we feel it physically. That's why they're called feelings. And so it's very painful. All these emotions, and it's like, I just want to be out of this pain. I just want relief from this pain. Just get me out. And so for men, I would say, men in our culture, or in this culture anyway, or many cultures traditionally are associated with more like strength and risk taking, and this type of like completion of action in this way, just from like a gender role point of view, just as a traditional gender role point of view. And so maybe that's why there's more of a reason, more of a willingness to complete the action. That could be. There's also a tremendous amount of shame for men. Everything that Mark was talking about, boys don't cry, pull yourself up your bootstraps. I mean, that's again, there's a lot of things for women too, as well, just to speak to those gender roles. But I think maybe that's the reason. It's all hypothesis really. But I would say that could be a possibility behind it.
Yeah. And the people left behind, feel a lot of blame, guilt, shame as well. And I think that it's really important for me to highlight right now that Laurie, you posted something on the eve of the first anniversary of Travis's suicide, where you said, "I don't blame myself for my husband's death, but I blame myself that I was so blind to the illusion that he had created for me. Do you still carry this now that you've seen what he went through and have understood a little deeper how it impacted him? What is it from here that has changed from the first year to now?
Because I was so shocked at his death. And after living with someone for 15 years, I thought, how did I miss this? Like, what happened? How could I have been so blind that I missed my husband wanting to kill himself? What did I do wrong? How did this happen? And I started contacting people who have tried themselves because I wanted to understand where I went wrong. And as this more and more people that I interview, particularly men, but not just men, they say that they are ashamed, that they are the protector of the family. They're the ones that offer strength. And to share their depression or wanting to die is a weakness. And what I've learned is that depression is not a weakness. It is not a character flaw. It is a medical condition. And if people will start seeing it that way, then maybe Travis would have gotten help, but he thought it was a weakness.
Yeah. That's right. And I know that you went through a struggle in thinking about how to bring your children in on this and speaking with them about this. And like all mothers, I think our first reaction would be to protect them and to not tell them the truth and to be able to support them in some way. And I know that you chose to verbatim talk about what the counselor told you to say. I'm wondering, what did the counselor tell you to speak about and how to speak about that? And why was it recommended that you take that course of action?
Well, at the time, my daughter was 13, my son was 10. And I had no idea what to tell them. And I really, honestly wanted to lie to them. That was my knee-jerk reaction. They were still at school and I was running out of time. And the people I work with got me on the phone with a therapist. She's an expert in grief and suicide. And I said, I have no idea what to tell my children. And she said, you must tell them the truth. And she said, you tell them this. Your father died from depression. He took his own life. And that's what I told them, verbatim.
Wow. There is Harvard who's written in, and he says that your story has really helped prevent this in his life. And he claims that you're an amazing inspiration to him. So thank you so much for that. And painful, painful as all of this is really, it would help for people to understand, in hindsight, of course, what are some of the signs and symptoms that they can look for, especially given a perfectly hidden depression type of situation.
So I just want to kind of blow up some myths about depression. My husband was extremely active. He wasn't someone who stayed in bed. He was always doing something, trying to learn Spanish, sign language. He was getting his doctorate. He was coaching our daughter's volleyball team. He was always on the go. The one thing he did not do was sleep. He slept very little. And now that I look back, that was a sign. Something else I can see very clearly. I couldn't at the time, but if I look at pictures of him over the course of maybe 5, 6, 7 years, you can see it in his eyes. They're a dead giveaway. You can see the depression weighing on him. those are the two things I missed: the sleep and the look in his face, particularly his eyes. He had the smile, he was wearing the smile, but the eyes show he was not happy.
Yeah. Elijah, have you seen this? Have you seen this happen, where the reflection of the external self is not in sync with the internal self, and the depiction sometimes gets lost in the people closest, and in the people closest to them. How do we bring ourselves to note these intricacies?
This is something that can raise our awareness, listening to this right now. I just also want to say, when it comes to the word blame, or even the term missing something, it's almost better to say what you didn't see. There's a difference in the nuance of how those two are said, because, you know, as we've been talking about here, we're not going to we are just as depression can influence our perception and we think what we're thinking is true. The despair, we just really believe it. Everyday living, if you're not depressed, I promise you, what you're seeing and paying attention to is being influenced by all the implicit biases that are there, and you're having a one perception of things. So you might just not see things. Or it could be something unconscious where your mind's not consciously seeing it on purpose because of the discomfort that's there. So the deadness in somebody's eyes, you might not see that, but maybe right now this conversation may have you looking for it all of a sudden. So now you're looking for that color and saying, like, is that there? Am I seeing this? So you're aware of one more thing to attend to or pay attention to. Because again, someone who's really good at hiding it is going to be really good at hiding it. And you may not see it.
True. Mark,
but anyway, my point is, because yeah, okay, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
I just want to release I just want to release any reason for blame around anything. Everyone is you're really doing the best you can. You're really doing the best you can. And being here and listening to this right now is going to raise awareness, keep something in short-term memory to maybe see something different or take a different type of action. And then that's the best you're doing the best you can in that moment. So, believe that.
Yeah. Every moment of exposing yourself is really creating a deeper vision for you in this space. Mark, I'd really like some final thoughts from you about suicide prevention and how we can take this forward in our lives and service the people around us.
Viktor Frankl once wrote that between stimulus and response, there's a space, and in that space is our power to choose our response. And our response is our growth and our freedom. I think that so often we collapse the space between stimulus and response, stress and our reaction to that stress, that we give up all our power. And when I felt my most suicidal, all the times that I felt my most suicidal, I felt powerless, like I had no control over my mind, over my environment, over my body, my future. I thought that this was it. And there's no more profound sense of languishing than feeling like nothing will ever change, that this is all there is. When, of course, life is change. There's no such thing as there not being change in the world. And when we try to cling too tightly to the way things are, good or bad, it just leads to that friction inside of us that causes suffering. So I think that when we learn to create that space between the data of our emotions and our feelings, our reactions, our environment, that all needs to be validated. It's good, valuable input, but we we are not our feelings. We are not our thoughts. We don't have to collapse the difference or the space between those two things. So I think that's something that comes with growth, with certainly with active, intentional practice. And that's the only way that I've been able to figure out anyway, with more than 20 years of doing this, to regain my agency over my own life. So I hope that's what others do who are either suicidal or grieving the loss of somebody who died by suicide as well, is realizing that you do have power over your life, that your agency is your freedom, and you can cultivate that.
Thank you, Mark. Elijah, a few last thoughts from you, because I think that Mark's statement also brings us to using mindfulness as a tool as well. I'd really like you to talk a little bit about that as your final thoughts, or if you have any other final thoughts that you want to add to it.
Just with that said, sometimes mindfulness is not the answer when someone's in a deep depression. That Viktor Frankl, that quote that's been attributed to Viktor Frankl is one that's super close to my heart. It's actually it's the quote that this book I wrote called The Now Effect is based on, is Viktor Frankl's quote. So thanks for bringing that up. And there's power in that statement. When someone's deeply depressed, sometimes more action-based things are more helpful for them. But what Mark's statement, that moment of saying, are you facing your own discomfort around connecting around this? The moment you're able to name it, you've taken that space and you've widened it a little bit. And in that space, if there's choice, possibility, and freedom in there, you've just expanded the ability of what kind of choices you have in this moment. And we can call that a choice point. And then we move toward, which is an act of love, moving toward to ask the question, I see that you've been doing these things. Is there something going on? And are you thinking about hurting yourself? You're seeing these signs that are there, is an act of connection. And again, connection's at the epicenter of well-being. If a person's feeling despair, again, the opposite is not hope, it's action. And you taking action with yourself and inclining towards that person, you're changing everything by doing that. And that's to me what it is. So thanks for reminding us of that, Mark. And I just want to show extreme gratitude for everybody here and everybody who's listening and everybody who is even holding this in their minds and hearts, because you're creating a certain energy to keep this top of mind. You don't know what that will change in the moments, the hours and days and weeks and months and years ahead in your life. And you could save your own life. You could save other people's lives. And so just gratitude for that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And Laurie, over to you. Your final thoughts.
There was a gentleman in Montreal that I interviewed who had tried to kill himself, and he told me something, and you all alluded to it. He said, there's a difference between wanting the pain to stop and wanting to die. They're two separate things that get confused when you're suicidal. And I want people out there to understand that you don't have to die to get that pain to stop. You don't have to. My husband never sought treatment for his depression. And if you can reach out to begin to get that help, it will make it much easier when your depression is here versus when you hit a crisis point, because you can't learn how to swim when you're drowning. You just can't.
Thank you so much. And this brings us to the end of this conversation. And I want to thank all my guests for being here and for being brave enough to share their stories. I know, Dr. Elijah, you have a new course coming up, which is 21 Days to Relieve Anxiety Naturally. It would really help if you could share with people where they can find that.
You could just go to 21dayanxietyrelief.com. What I've done is I've opened it up for free access to everybody. So you can go through the whole program without paying for anything. At the end of the program, there is a cost to it. But if you've already experienced the value from that, then that's not an issue. But at any point, you don't. You can just stop at no charge to you. But so it's free access to anyone. 21dayanxietyrelief.com.
Thank you. Thank you all once again. I'm Prakriti Poddar. Be well and have a great day. Goodbye for now.